conspiracy to commit burglary between July 2023 and February 2024. You do not have to say anything, but may arm your defence if you do not mention.
Monday, the 15th of September, 2025. Shrewsbury Crown Court stood ready for a case that had haunted the countryside for years. Farmers filled the gallery, their faces lined, not just by weather, but by worry, the memory of sleepless nights, guard dogs pacing, locks double-checked, and barns left empty. In the dock sat 7 men. On paper, they were ordinary builders, mechanics, fathers. In reality, they were architects of one of the most audacious rural theft sprees Britain has ever seen. From Shropshire to Gwynedd, they slipped down hedge-lined lanes under cover of darkness, posing as holidaymakers while plotting raids. Their trophies weren't jewels or banknotes, but tractors, Land Rovers, quad bikes, trailers, wood chippers, even chainsaws, the very tools that kept farms alive. For nearly 2 years, their caravan hideouts doubled as planning hubs. More than 100 thefts were traced back to the same crew. The value, staggering, between 5 and 10 million pounds worth of machinery gone. Now, as the gavel struck, justice finally caught up with them. The countryside, long gripped by fear, could breathe again. This is the story of the 7 thieves who thought the fields were theirs for the taking until the law caught up. The thefts began as whispers. A quad bike taken from a barn outside Shrewsbury. A Land Rover gone by dawn in a village near Dolgellau. A generator vanished from a farmyard in Bala. At first, each incident looked like a one-off, bad luck, a random strike. But as the weeks stacked into months, the whispers grew into a chorus of fear. Something larger was unfolding in the countryside. Farmers who had spent lifetimes working the land now felt under siege. Locks were changed, watchdogs prowled restless nights, and farmers took turns staying awake until sunrise, listening for engines on country lanes. Every morning came with the same anxious routine: a walk to the sheds, a look into the barn, a check on the yard. Too often, the sight that met them was empty space where vital equipment had once stood. For a farmer, a tractor is not just machinery, it is the beating heart of the land. Without it, fields cannot be plowed, crops cannot be lifted, livestock cannot be moved. When thieves rolled away with a machine worth £40,000 or more, they weren't just stealing metal, they were ripping a hole in a family's livelihood, forcing them into debt, delaying harvests, and throwing entire operations into chaos. The criminals knew this. They understood the rhythms of rural life, the long distances between farms, and the gaps in police coverage across counties stretched thin. They struck at night, moving swiftly and silently, often leaving little trace. Their vehicles wound through narrow lanes, slipping past sleeping villages, headlights covered, until they reached a barn or outbuilding ripe for the taking. And they were patient. These weren't smash-and-grab opportunists. The men behind the spree studied their targets. They visited rural areas under the guise of being tourists, blending into camping and caravan sites dotted across North Wales and Shropshire. To the untrained eye, they looked like families on a summer break. Barbecues smoking, children playing, vans parked neatly between holiday caravans. But once night fell, the smiles dropped. The campers became raiders. From August 2022 through early 2024, the pattern repeated with chilling consistency. A generator here, a quad bike there, then larger prizes. Tractors hauled away in the dead of night, Land Rovers driven off before dawn. Each theft seemed bold, but together they painted a picture of organization. This was no random spree. It was a calculated campaign that spanned counties, cost millions, and unsettled communities that had long thought of crime as an urban problem. Police forces across the borderlands knew something bigger was at play. West Mercia officers were logging case after case of high-value rural theft. In Gwynedd, the North Wales Rural Crime Team was overwhelmed by calls from farmers reporting stolen kit. Dyfed Powys Police saw the same. It was like pieces of a puzzle spread across 3 forces. Each fragment alone was alarming. Together they revealed something unprecedented. By early 2024, investigators estimated the gang had taken items worth between 5 and 10 million pounds. The sheer scale was staggering. More than 150 offences were linked to the same crew: tractors, quads, trailers, Land Rovers, wood chippers, chainsaws, even firearms. Anything that could be sold or stripped for parts was fair game. For the farmers left behind, the damage went beyond balance sheets. There was the emotional toll, families feeling unsafe in their own homes, parents afraid to leave children alone while they worked the fields, communities that once left doors unlocked, now barricading themselves in. What had once been quiet, trusting landscapes were reshaped into places of suspicion and fear. And still the thieves pressed on. They thought they had found the perfect hunting ground. Rural communities too scattered to resist, police too overstretched to catch them, millions in machinery lying ripe for the taking. But in the shadows of every theft, the law was closing in. Operations were being launched, surveillance mounted, and data pieced together. The countryside might have seemed defenseless, but it wasn't. By the time the arrests came, the countryside already knew the gang by reputation, ghosts in the night who vanished with tractors, quads, and 4x4s. But in court, those shadows finally had names. 7 men, all from Shropshire and nearby towns, were revealed as the architects of the theft spree that bled millions from rural Britain. At the top was Wayne Price, 32, from Crosshouses near Shrewsbury. Price was the linchpin, the man investigators described as the ringleader. His name was tied to the planning, the organization, and the ruthless efficiency that defined the operation. When the sentences were handed down, it was no surprise that he received the harshest penalty, 9 years behind bars. For farmers who had felt the sting of his actions, the figure was more than a number, it was vindication. Close behind was Andrew Baker, 36, of Shifnal. A mechanic by trade, Baker's skill wasn't just with fixing machines, but in moving them. He played a pivotal role in transporting stolen goods, ensuring tractors and trailers disappeared into a labyrinth of storage sites. Baker's 4 years and 5 months reflected his part as both driver and facilitator. Then there was Thomas Nutt, 27, of Broseley. At first glance, he was unremarkable, young, quiet, another face in a small town. But prosecutors argued he was a core player in the thefts, directly involved in break-ins across Shropshire. His sentence matched Baker's, 4 years and 5 months. Dean Rogerson, 34, from Telford, had a reputation as one of the gang's foot soldiers. He was often on the ground during raids, handling smaller equipment, loading trailers, and providing backup when larger vehicles were stolen. Rogerson received 3 years and 1 month. Ryan Taylor, 32, also from Telford, played a similar role. His part was more sporadic, but still significant, helping to scout rural properties, assisting with transport, and moving stolen kit further down the chain. For that, he was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months. The youngest face in the dock was Neil Shevlin, 32, from Shifnal. Though he was less central than Price or Baker, he acted as a handler, taking possession of stolen goods and ensuring they were broken down for resale. His sentence, 1 year and 2 months, reflected a smaller but undeniable role in the conspiracy. Finally, there was Christopher Downs, 35, from Broseley. Downs wasn't on the front line of the thefts, but was caught up in the conspiracy through handling and assisting. He received 7 months. Together, their sentences added up to more than 25 years behind bars. But the damage they had caused stretched far beyond numbers. For more than 18 months, they had treated the countryside like a supermarket, picking what they wanted and vanishing into the night. What united them wasn't background or glamour, it was opportunity. Each man came from ordinary roots. They weren't masterminds of international crime, but they understood the value of rural machinery and the gaps in countryside policing. Some had knowledge of mechanics, others of back roads, others of logistics. Brought together, those skills became a blueprint for theft on an unprecedented scale. In court, prosecutors made clear that this wasn't petty crime. It was organized, deliberate, and devastating. The men had chosen victims who were isolated, farms that were vulnerable, and communities that struggled to recover from each hit. For the 7 men, sentencing marked the end of their freedom. For the countryside, it was the first breath of relief after 2 years of fear. The story of this gang is best told not through their names, but through the trail they left behind. 100 barns, sheds, and yards broken open, families jolted awake to the silence of missing machinery, farmers walking out at first light to find tire tracks carved into the mud, gates splintered, locks shattered, and tens of thousands of pounds of equipment gone. From August 2022 to February 2024, the pattern was relentless. Police later logged more than 150 offenses linked to the same crew. On some nights, 2 or 3 farms were hit in succession. On others, entire villages woke to discover the thieves had swept through like a storm. The gang's appetite was vast. They didn't limit themselves to one type of prize. Tractors worth upwards of £60,000 were taken under cover of darkness, sometimes driven miles before being loaded onto transporters. Quad bikes and trailers were snapped up in minutes, lightweight, valuable, and easy to resell. Land Rovers, beloved by farmers but notoriously easy to steal, were particular favorites. Tools like chainsaws, strimmers, wood chippers, and generators vanished in bulk, their combined value running into hundreds of thousands. Even firearms and air rifles were taken, raising chilling questions about where those weapons might have ended up. It was theft on an industrial scale. Investigators estimated the total haul was between £5 million and £10 million, an almost unimaginable sum for crimes that played out far from city banks or jewelry stores. This wasn't gold or cash. It was the raw machinery of rural life, equipment every farmer depends on. The geographic spread was just as staggering. In Shropshire, the gang focused on south of the county, targeting farms scattered around Bridgnorth, Broseley, and Shrewsbury. In North Wales, they pushed deep into Gwynedd, striking in Tywyn, Dolgellau, Bala, Harlech, and Dyffryn Ardudwy. In Powys, they hit properties across Montgomeryshire. The raids formed a patchwork of red dots on a map, each one marking another victim, another loss. The thefts were carefully timed. The gang exploited long winter nights, striking when the roads were quiet and villages were asleep. They knew when lambing or harvesting would keep farmers busiest, leaving less time to guard equipment. They favored weekends and holidays when caravan parks were busy and their presence could be masked as tourism. For the victims, the experience was devastating. One farmer reported losing £60,000 worth of machinery in a single night. Another spoke of being unable to work his land for weeks while waiting for replacements. Insurance payouts, when they came, were slow and incomplete. Some farmers were forced to rent equipment, sinking further into debt. Others borrowed from neighbors, creating a ripple of disruption across entire communities. The scale of theft also created fear. Families who had once left doors unlocked began installing CCTV, alarms, and motion lights. Villagers formed watch groups, keeping lists of strange vehicles and unfamiliar faces. Farmers swapped stories about patrols, taking it in turns to sit awake in pickup trucks, engines idling, torches ready. The peace of rural life had been replaced by a siege mentality. For nearly 2 years, the countryside felt hunted, and every time a lock was broken or a barn door swung open, the gang's confidence grew. They believed they had found the perfect formula: vast stretches of land, scarce police patrols, high-value machinery, and quick resale markets. But while they were busy counting their profits, the police were quietly building a case. Piece by piece, theft by theft, investigators were tracing the invisible lines that tied these crimes together. The 7 men weren't masterminds in suits or international smugglers with offshore accounts. Their strength lay in something simpler: knowing the countryside, understanding its weaknesses, and disguising themselves as what they weren't. The cover story was always the same: holidaymakers. Caravans and campervans were their camouflage, rolling into campsites across Shropshire and North Wales with the ease of families looking for a weekend away. They'd chat with site wardens, blend in with tourists, barbecue sausages in the evenings. To neighbors, they looked like just another group of men escaping city life. But under that facade, the planning was already underway. At night, reconnaissance trips became raids. The gang moved in convoys, a van to carry tools, a flatbed or trailer for the heavy machinery, and lookouts to scout the lanes ahead. They carried bolt croppers, crowbars, and grinders, enough to tear through locks in minutes. Sometimes they even drove the stolen vehicles straight off farms, Headlights darkened until they were far from sight. What made them effective wasn't just their stealth, it was their organization. Each man had a role. Wayne Price, the ringleader, orchestrated targets and logistics. Others specialized in transport, knowing how to load bulky equipment onto trailers quickly. Some acted as handlers, breaking down machinery into parts that could be sold piecemeal. Even the smaller items, chainsaws, strimmers, leaf blowers, were bundled and shifted fast, turning into cash with ease. The disposal network was wide. Some goods were moved to storage yards closer to the West Midlands, stripped for resale within days. Others vanished further afield, likely laundered through crooked dealers and black market traders. A tractor might be resold overseas, a quad bike broken down into engines and frames, a Land Rover shipped in parts to avoid detection. The countryside's lifeblood was being converted into criminal profit streams. The gang also used technology to their advantage. They knew that police response times in rural areas could be slow, and that CCTV coverage thinned out in villages and farms. They picked sites with poor lighting, remote barns, or farms where gates opened directly onto quiet lanes. They studied routines when farmers went to market, when livestock was moved, when families were away. In some cases, they struck the same farm twice, confident enough to return once replacement kit had arrived. Investigators later discovered that the gang treated theft almost like shift work. They'd camp for a week, strike repeatedly, then retreat back home to lie low. Their phones, travel patterns, and campsite bookings revealed the rhythm. Shropshire 1 week, Gwynedd the next. It was a cycle designed to stay one step ahead of local policing. What they didn't anticipate was the patience of the detectives watching them. Every campsite check-in, every late-night trip, every item resold became another thread in a web that was slowly closing around them. For the gang, their methods seemed foolproof. To farmers, it felt like the thieves were always one step ahead, but in reality, the clock was already ticking. By late 2023, the thefts had reached a scale no police force could ignore. What looked like isolated crimes were, in fact, pieces of one sprawling conspiracy. The key was coordination. West Mercia Police launched Operation Broadsheet to tackle the Shropshire raids, while in North Wales, detectives ran Operation Caliphate. Soon, the two forces were sharing intelligence, pooling evidence, and building a picture of the same gang moving across borders. The breakthroughs came from patience and detail. CCTV footage placed familiar vehicles near farms on the nights of thefts. Mobile phone data showed the suspects' devices traveling in tandem, mirroring the routes of stolen tractors and Land Rovers. Campsite records revealed the gang's cover story, bookings that lined up perfectly with spikes in local burglaries. Surveillance units followed the men back to storage yards where stolen machinery sat waiting to be moved. Forensics tied them to bolt croppers and tools abandoned in the rush to escape. Piece by piece, the net tightened. In March 2024, the operation reached its climax. Dawn raids were carried out across Shropshire. Homes in Shrewsbury, Broseley, and Telford stormed simultaneously. Officers pulled suspects from caravans, garages, and beds. Bodycam footage later showed the moment Wayne Price, the ringleader, was dragged into custody, ending nearly 2 years of fear for rural families. The charges were sweeping: conspiracy to steal, handling stolen goods, and burglary. When the 7 men were finally lined up in court, prosecutors had built a case so detailed that guilty pleas became the only option. On the 15th of September 2025, the saga reached its end inside Shrewsbury Crown Court. 7 men, once the faceless shadows of the countryside, now stood exposed. Together they were sentenced to more than 25 years in prison. The ringleader, Wayne Price, received 9 years. His lieutenants, Andrew Baker and Thomas Nutt, were each handed 4 years and 5 months. Dean Rogerson followed with 3 years and a month, while Ryan Taylor was jailed for 2.5 years. Neil Shevlin, with a smaller role, received 1 year and 2 months, and Christopher Downs was given 7 months. For the victims, the sentences brought a measure of closure. Farmers who had spent sleepless nights guarding barns could finally breathe easier. But the scars remained: financial strain, higher insurance premiums, and the lingering unease of knowing how vulnerable the countryside had been. Police hailed the convictions as a warning. Rural crime is not low-level or victimless. It strikes at the core of communities and livelihoods. By dismantling this gang, investigators not only ended a 2-year spree, but sent a message to others who might see isolated farms as easy prey. The countryside had been scarred, but justice had spoken.